Hi, I'm Dr. Walter Matwychuk. I'm here to talk to you about the application of rational emotive behavior therapy to enhancing performance in athletes, as well as enhancing their emotional well-being. Most people think of REBT as a therapy for emotional and behavioral disorders, and certainly that it is. However, it's more than that. It's also a system of ideas that can enhance performance in those who are engaged in numerous pursuits, whether it be athletic competition or other sorts of performance-oriented activities. These activities require people to maintain poise and their emotions, control over their emotions as they face competition or they face adversities. Athletes face numerous adversities that can impact their emotions, and if they don't manage their emotions properly, their emotional reaction will undermine their performance. So, for example, an athlete involved in athletic competition will encounter their own poor performance, the poor performance of their teammates. They may disagree with the decisions a coach makes in the heat of a moment. They may face adversities in the form of taunting by other players. They may face bad calls that work against their team made by referees. And if they experience unhealthy anger, they will then see that their performance degrades. And so what rational emotive behavior therapy has to offer an athlete is to help them have healthy negative emotions even when they face adversities that may be unfair, like bad calls by referees, or when they face poor performance by themselves or their teammates. When an athlete is performing, it's important that they have concentration, and when they perform poorly or something bad happens, they need to be able to let go of their emotional upset if it occurs and move into the next moment with a high level of concentration and poise. And rational emotive behavior therapy helps people adopt the principle of emotional responsibility so that an athlete doesn't blame their self-defeating emotional reactions on external factors like the behavior of other teammates or the taunting by other players or the bad calls by officials. And so rational emotive behavior therapy can be useful to an athlete who has difficulty staying in that optimal level of emotional arousal so that they prevail even when things go against them in the heat of a game. REBT teaches people to have flexible and non-extreme attitudes. And certainly if an athlete demands excellence in themselves, in their teammates, in their coaches, or in referees, they may very well then anger themselves when excellence is something that is not occurring. So REBT encourages people to, and athletes in particular, to have a healthy desire for excellence, but not to demand it. And so REBT is going to teach athletes to have flexible. Now, flexible attitudes do not mean flimsy attitudes. So an athlete can strongly want to succeed, but it's very important that an athlete acknowledge that there's a fine line between a strong desire to do well and a demand that they absolutely have to do well, and a strong desire that other teammates perform optimally well, and a demand that they absolutely have to. Games are played with fallible humans, and so your teammates, yourself, your coaches, and the officials that attempt to maintain order during a game are all fallible, and there will be errors. And the athletes that prevail are the ones who can have healthy negative emotions of healthy disappointment or healthy annoyance or concern, healthy concern when things are going against them. And so REBT can help coaches and athletes learn to maintain their emotional poise when performing so that they can live up to their potential, because prevailing in sports is more than physical, it's also psychological. Now, athletes also have emotions between games. So, for example, when an athlete's injured, it can very well be quite difficult for them not to be depressed or when they're watching a game from the sidelines. And what happens with athletes sometimes is they cannot tolerate being out of the lineup, and they'll rush the rehabilitation period only to cause them to re-injure themselves and thereby extend the length of time that they're out. And so during the rehabilitation period, the REBT philosophy of unconditional life acceptance can help an athlete bear the discomfort they experience, the adversity of being out of the lineup, and conservatively pursuing health through rehabilitation. Athletes get sometimes very depressed when they're injured, and then they can be difficult to live with. They may abuse substances or not do what they can to get themselves back into the lineup. Athletes also can use REBT to help them prevent overtraining, because although athletes want to have high discomfort tolerance for training, they sometimes overtrain and set themselves up for injury, and that will then undermine performing well if they create an injury through practicing too hard. Other athletes sometimes will practice what they're good at, but won't practice what they're not so good at. And really, the athletes that get the most return on their investment in practice are the ones who do what's difficult, do what they're not so good at, and then thereby improve their game. And again, this comes down to a matter of discomfort tolerance, where people will find it's hard to practice what they're not so good at, and therefore they'll try to kid themselves and do what they're good at. So I remember when I was a baseball player, a coach once said that fielders, people who are good in the field, like to practice fielding, and hitters like to practice hitting. But really, and nobody likes to practice bunting. But the bottom line is that the most effective athletes are those who are willing to put in the time doing things that are uncomfortable and they're not so good at. And that's where really you get a great return on investment. REBT has many other applications for the athlete. So, for example, when an athlete has to retire, that can be a very emotionally difficult decision to make. Or when they face a career-ending injury, the depth of their depression can be great. And so REBT will help them come to accept themselves and accept the transition away from being an athlete, playing that role, into pursuing other aspects of life that can be very engaging. And then finally, the other concept in REBT that's very relevant to athletic performance is keeping your ego out of your performance. Athletes tend to identify with their role as athletes, and then they see themselves as being bad and suffering from shame when they perform poorly. And what REBT tries to remind people is that their performance in an athletic competition doesn't define them. People easily go from thinking that they've performed poorly to they are lesser of a person for having done so. And athletes are particularly at risk for defining themselves when they do well and defining themselves when they do poorly. And what we want to show and teach athletes is to separate their ego from their performance and rate their performance so that they can learn from a bad performance, sometimes learn quickly in the midst of a game if they perform poorly, but not to get down on themselves, not to depreciate themselves. And athletes have all sorts of rigid attitudes, like I must not let my my fellow players and coaches down. I must not let the fans down. And they engage in all sorts of rigid and extreme attitudes that then ultimately lead to self-devaluation. So given that I can't go into every irrational attitude that applies to athletes, the message of today's intermittent reinforcement email message in this video is to understand that REBT really applies to any kind of performance activity. It's not just helping you perform well at work when your supervisor criticizes you, or helping you perform well at home when your children misbehave, or overcoming your depression, but it really can actually help people self-actualize and do whatever they like to do better by having good emotional regulation. So I'd encourage you to read the blog post that goes along with this video. And more importantly, I encourage you to begin to apply REBT to all sorts of adversities that you may encounter, whether you're an athlete or whether you're someone else pursuing other sorts of personal goals. I'd also like to remind you that every Saturday I hold a conversation on Zoom at 9 a.m. Eastern here in New York, where I take a volunteer somewhere in the world and I show them how to apply some of the powerful ideas of rational emotive behavior therapy to a problem they're willing to discuss in a public setting. And what this is an opportunity to see how REBT can apply to a wide range of problems. And also it helps people learn how to apply REBT to their particular problem. So even if the problem the person is speaking about is something that really doesn't directly apply to you, you will observe the therapeutic process, the discussion of applying the ABC model, the framework of REBT, to the volunteer's particular problem. It's free to attend. It occurs at 9 a.m. Eastern on Zoom. It's every Saturday. I'm approaching my 250th consecutive week of doing this. And so I'd encourage you to write to me at rebtdoctor@gmail.com so that you can obtain the link. You could also go to rebtdoctor.com, my website, and take advantage of all the free audio and video that's to be found there. REBT really is an educational method of helping people evolve, manage their emotions, self-actualize. It's really, it has the word therapy in it, but it really is more than a therapy. It's really a philosophy of life. It's a performance enhancement system of ideas. You can think of it in many different ways. It's a psychotherapy, if you will, but it really is adult education aimed at bringing out the best in an individual. So I encourage you to visit my website. I encourage you to watch me every Saturday so that you can learn how to apply this powerful set of ideas to your own performance goals. And if you're an athlete, I would encourage you to open your mind to learning REBT so that you can build upon your natural physical gifts so that you practice smartly and intelligently, and then play the game optimally well by attending not only to the physical side of the game, but also to the emotional side of the game, which can matter greatly in how well you perform. I hope to see you on Saturday.